is trying to see if we could create an architecture that allows that building to breathe, it allows for air to move through, it allows for social spaces to happen that are shaded. Learning from the idea of the traditional chhatri and the jalis that you actually have to allow for cool air to kind of move into the building and then exit through the courtyard. So you can see how that openness at the top allows for temperatures here inside to be lower by about 7 to 8 degrees. During the hot summers, the temperatures go up to 50 to 53.
I'm going to speak about the Rajkumari School. There's rainwater harvesting system, which is basically the entire courtyard, and it produces enough water for the school. We used recycled tiles for the roof. The light through the jalis created this kind of magical occurrence, and it almost feels like water.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Ramdeep, for that introduction. So when Pranti asked me to come to speak at this forum, I was in some sense thinking back to the projects that we've done and to see how one might be able to frame those conversations through the lens of shade and creating home. But when I was also kind of doing that, I was also thinking about some of the work that I think was interesting for me when I was a student and also when and later on in practice. So these two books, one is Charles writing about architecture and how climate in some sense is perhaps the most defining paradigm for building in our country and countries like ours, which was one book, and the other one, The Shadow, which really talks about the cultural and social aspects of shape, light, and its impact on the interior environment of buildings, specifically in Japan. And when you go back, everyone's works and our peers and also the masters, they've all built within the Indian context their work responding to amongst various kind of programmatic complexities, also responding to climate big time. So that's really, I think, where the title of the talk comes from as well. The idea that when we are building today, we are also building on the shoulders of people who've come before us, and knowledge systems that have evolved over centuries. And it's up to us as practitioners to start looking at how we might be able to bring those influences in today's time. So I'm going to start with just the idea of buildings that one sees in India, a very typical typology, the temple and the way that it's ossified in memory, but also how it's very fluid in the way that it finds its way within our cities as these found objects, where nature becomes a part of these religious symbols as well. But the other thing to also remember is that this is also a multi-purpose space where water tanks, harvesting tanks, water reservoirs became a part of this temple architecture, but was also serving a purpose beyond just the kind of religious need that it had. So I'm just going to go to this small project that we've done in Nandyal, which is in Andhra Pradesh. It's actually a small temple that we were asked to build by JSW, and this was a part of their cement plant outreach for the surrounding villages. It was also a place where they did a lot of quarrying for limestone, and limestone becomes the basic building block for making cement. And when we were actually working in this area, we found that all the quarrying that they were doing for limestone, they were using cement, they were using water to cut the stone, and this water was then just evaporating. And on surveying the surrounding areas, we found that there was very little water in the water table. It had dramatically dropped, and farmers had even changed their cropping patterns based on the availability of groundwater. So what we were trying to do is, while working with the traditional planning principles of the Balaji temple, we were also trying to see or relate the idea of temple and land and temple and building And to see there's a relation that we could make with the idea of the kund or the ghat and the project. Is there a possibility where all of this water that is evaporating can be brought into a low-lying area, recharge groundwater, but also becomes a kind of kund from which the temple emerges? These are just some models of that project. This is a diagram that talks about the organizational idea, which I won't really get into too much, but there are there are two small temples. There are two temples and one priest's quarters and kitchen. And there is this low-lying water body that actually surrounds it, which is also a place where they wash the shrines in the temples. And what you see here is the plan. But what's very interesting is the fact that we're able to bring all this water and phytoremediate it and then hold it within that harvesting tank, and then the excess of that water is then used to supply back to the farmers in that area. These are just some more visuals of the temple, its scale. It's built out of a local limestone, and what you can see here in the distance is a cement factory and the temple here. And what this image actually shows you how that the water harvesting body also sends a lot of the excess runoff back into the fields for farmers to use. So it really becomes, from just being a temple, it actually becomes a water management project of some kind. What you also see is that the lower steps that actually come out from the water have landscape buffers in them. So this also keeps the interior of the temple really cool, and of course the fact that there's stone also buffers all that heat. And finally, that relationship between water, the ecosystem within which this entire place is situated, the economic repercussions all become a kind of programming idea for the project. And this is just an interior of temple Padora. Now, working in India, one of the things that's really particular about our country is the incredible diversity. I mean, from these wonderful geographies that go from deserts to mountains to seasides to these lush tropical river geographies, to a kind of material ecosystem that also is as varied as the geographies that we inhabit, which also creates, which has historically created archetypes that are particular to various parts of the country. And this diversity is something that really is an outcome of the specificity to this particular context that we build in. So this is a small project that we've done in Kota. It's a set of hostels for students who come to Kota every year to do IIT exams, to study for IIT exams. And of course, Kota is a part of Rajasthan and Jaisalmer. I mean, we know this kind of city fabric, right? It's incredible. These are very intricate urban spaces, terraces, gullies, courtyards. And in some sense, if you look at the house form of, let's say, the Patoti Haveli, it's actually an incredibly articulated climatic device, right? Whether it's the facade and the jalis or the courtyard and the way that it actually works to funnel hot air through the building. The evolution of that house form has gone from the idea of a village compounded house to finally the urban block, and at all times developing a embedded intelligence of how to respond to the harsh climate of this area. However, if you look at the city today, this is what Kota is. Right? I mean, this is the kind of architecture that's built despite being in a tradition of such incredibly rich and sensitive building tradition. And we were actually asked to build a hostel in this line. Now, besides the architectural challenges of building within Kota and building within these kind of party wall formats, there is also a kind of social problem that because of the number of students who actually commit suicide because of not making the cut for IIT exams, there is another kind of shroud of unlivability within the hostels, which once you see one of the typical hostels, you realize it's basically a central corridor and rooms on both sides. Many times these rooms don't have light ventilation. It's very oppressive living environments. So what we were trying to do in this case is trying to see if we could create an architecture that allows that building to breathe, it allows for air to move through, it allows for social spaces to happen that are shaded in some sense, learning from the stepped geographies of the built form of many of the cities in Rajasthan. And then to kind of look at how this building in some sense creates these micro environments, almost like a miniature painting at Rajasthan, where you can see this flattening of time, but also the kind of diversity of usages of space all the way through. And this is the final project. You can see the front towards the road, but it actually has a large void as opposed to the other buildings here. The voids allow for connect with the ground, the garden beyond, but it also, in some sense, creates a scheme which is learning from the idea of the traditional chhatri and the jalis that you actually have to allow for cool air to kind of move into the building and then exit through the courtyard. So this was our interpretation of what that facade would be and how that skin with the jali works and the openings for the students beyond. These are just some more images of that, and then you kind of move through that void that you saw into a central courtyard, which then becomes this incredible climatic device. It allows cross ventilation, but also allows for hot air to escape. It allows you to create visual connections between the street and the building, and also within the courtyard and the various floors of within the project. This is the image of the courtyard. All of this is graded down into a water harvesting tank. So whatever rainfall we get here is actually taken away for harvesting and storage. These are just some images of looking back through the courtyard upwards, and these multiple vertical courtyard social spaces, terraces that allow for students to also keep an eye on each other, allows for interaction. So there can be some amount of constant engagement with each other, and while they come here to study as a focused environment, there's a community to allow for support whenever needed. These are just some more images of the hostel rooms, and then this is how the hostel fits in to that entire development along that street in Kota. This is another project that we've done in Maharashtra. It's called Jetwan. Also, whenever my time is up, you can just let me know. I'll try and close at that point. This is a small community center that we've done in rural Maharashtra. It's a part of a sugar factory. It's for the people the villagers who live in that area and work in the factory. It was supposed to be built in this really dense grove of trees, and we didn't want to cut a single tree. But yet, how do you create architecture that allows you to engage with what lies immediately beyond? They had a small guest house which allowed us these little glimpses of trees along that clearance at the top, and we thought that might be a way for us to do an architecture that allows you to create indoor space, but at the same time still allows you a visual connect with the grove that you're sitting in. That's a plan. It's basically a series of programs structured around 2 courtyards. It includes a skill development center, residential facilities, admin, and a meditation hall. We were engaging with the community constantly. We brought in Hunashala, who worked with us to create a material logic for the project. We initially wanted to build out of rammed earth, but that wasn't possible because it was the earth needed too much cement to stabilize. We then started looking for other material. We found the stone quarry from where we got stone dust, which was paste, and we used the stone dust to do these rammed stone dust walls as the architecture of the project. And what you see here are just some images of the first of those walls going up. And it's really a very simple diagram. The edge walls are stone dust, and you get a roof made out of recycled or upcycled wood from Alhang, from shipbreaking yards. That was really a very interesting process for us to see. And then these carpenters who work with us to create details for these projects to go up. And you can see the first images. There is the entire underside that is used to actually provide insulation using burlap, jute, waste jute bags, mud, straw wrapped around a stick, and then sun-dried to create this entire lower insulation material that actually sits like that. And then above, we actually have recycled mangrove tiles that take the roof. The floors are made out of dung and cement, that is stabilized the cement, but it's largely dung, and it becomes a means for also to build a kind of social connect, a socio-economic connect with the villagers who come and do this once a year. So it becomes a means for them to generate income. And hence the project also ties into the local economy. These are some images of the final project. You can see the stone dust walls. Here it's how the entire roof actually sits directly on the stone dust walls. There is a concrete cutter which produces also a beam, as well as is used to take whatever little water we have away for storage underground. These are just some more images of the project, and you can see how that openness at the top allows for temperatures here inside to be lower by about 7 to 8 degrees during the hot summers, where temperatures go up to 52 degrees. And that's where we actually started off from, the idea of being able to connect the surrounding landscape even when you're inside the project. The outside is really a kind of community space where people come together, and all the villagers use this as a part of their kind of programming requirements as a meeting. This is a small project we did in Hyderabad. It's actually very interesting that in India we have such a rich tradition of working with masonry, with brick and brick and clay masonry. And what we were trying to see is if we could go from this idea of the form, the structure, and the kind of the ornamentation, to see if we can actually use that within a project that we were doing in Hyderabad. We of course planned it in a way that there's natural ventilation through these apartments, so we always have cross ventilation. And then with the building thickness, what we were trying to see is if we can figure out a way to do a building skin that allows us to create shade even within just that thickness of the building skin that's available to us. What you actually see here is just a drawing that we made to see the various parts of those components so that it can be built on site. But when you're working with really skilled masons, they don't really look at drawings. So what we were also then doing is designing tools for that rotation to happen. So these are templates that we designed in wood for every brick to be rotated exactly the amount that you need for the next brick to stay in line to produce structural stability, and within which then that bay window actually sits embedded. These are just some construction images. The entire chaja is made out of local stone, and you can see here how the bay window is shaded, sitting within the envelope of the skin that then becomes a shadable device as well. So these are just some images. So this project obviously is about the kind of the nature of the building and its facade, but also about the way that it becomes a shading device. But it's also as much about designing those tools that will allow you to build something contextualized to the skills that are available, but also technology appropriate to where we build. How am I moving back? So I'm now at the second last project. I think Humpy Art Labs is the project that we've done down in the south in Vijayanagar. It's an artist residency project. It's right next to India and the world's largest steel plant now, I think, in terms of production. The site that we were given was very very close to this. However, it was a completely barren site. There was absolutely no physical characteristic on site. And then you start looking for context. How do you find context in a condition like this? What we were then trying to look at was just the larger region as such. And there is, of course, the incredible medieval kingdom of Vijayanagar, and it's somehow come back into public consciousness now within the mainstream. And it's incredible. If you've never been, I would highly recommend that you go. It's these beautiful old buildings that lie within this landscape, scattered within the landscape. Incredible architecture that survives today, indicating a time that was really sensitive to the material, but also to the landscape, especially the landscape of the Tungabhadra River that actually produces this incredible light water setting within which you actually have these buildings. And the more we actually saw the ruins, the more we were convinced that this entire project is not just about the building, it's actually about the setting of the landscape and the way that the landscape actually produces this incredible experience of architecture. This is the drawing that was at the Venice Biennale earlier this year, where we produced a drawing that spoke about the story of Hampi, its larger geographies, and the kind of building that we intervened with, and also the history of the cultural events that take place in this landscape. So it was really this idea of the river and its flow and the way that it sculpts the landscape that we brought back to our site to see if we can actually start programming a kind of landscape of sorts, but inspired by the imagery of the way landscape impacts the way that the river impacts the larger the landscape of Hampi. And it was with this, we then started looking at these kind of lines of flow that operate through the site, become movement areas for people as they move through the project. A lot of this becomes workshops, they become residences for the artists, they become gallery spaces for the artists who are working. And it's really a kind of drawing that, this drawing actually kind of shows the way that the landscape becomes the project in some sense. And while we of course made multiple drawings of the project, we were then trying to think about how you make this. It's a double curved surface. It's got large kind of curved roofs. So the way that we did this was we actually used whatever material that was removed for excavation for the project as formwork. So we actually cast the first set of arches of the walls of the project on the mud, on the stabilized mud. These are just some images which are under construction, and these are some images of the final project. And as you might know, Hampi is also a place that gets really heated. It gets very hot. So we were constantly trying to see how we would create shade in the way that the building opens up to the landscape. So there are these deep set openings that allow the building to actually float above, and they're extremely well shaded. They become spaces for artists to work in on the outside. And there is a kind of likeness to the building, but there's also kind of weight, which I think is really, really interesting. And that really, in some sense, is the story of the project, and develops a conversation between shade, light, shadow, and the sky. And those are just some images of how the landscape then takes over the building at various points, and then the residential facilities, and how all of the openings are actually really recessed to allow this deep set space that is neither the outside nor the inside, but extremely usable because of the fact that it's shaded. And it also becomes opportunities for us to create these frames from which you can see that incredible blue sky of Hampi. I think this is one of the last projects that I'm showing, which is a small housing project that we've done in Goa. And we were really, this is for a developer, but we were very inspired by the streetscapes of old Goa, and how in Mario Miranda's paintings you see that there is a kind of conversation that builds between the architecture and the street, and how these streets are always self-shaded. And we were trying to see if we could create that kind of conversation as we designed the project, which we regrade to allow for water to stay on our site even during the monsoon months. And these are just some images of that model. This is a plan of about 14 houses on that site. This is the section that talks about courtyards and shade and how they are shaded. And also this image kind of talks about the village that lies beyond our project, but is also in some sense extended in the way that the house and the street form extends into the project. And these are images of the final project. These houses are really tightly packed. They create this kind of in-between space, which is again neither the outside or the inside, but it becomes a place for interaction. The houses also create shade, and they are also, because of the fact that they're so lightly packed and vertical, they create shaded streets during the day, and they become really nice spaces for people to inhabit. And this is a typical balcony that is yet kind of materialized as the entry into the house. The last part of my project, for which I have 3 minutes, is really talking about the city and the fact that why we all acknowledge that our development is critical. What happens to development as we see it within the city today, and this kind of disconnect between what is planned and what is not. We've done 2 books on the subject. One about type, called The Healing of Housing, or How Related House, and the second one called Decoding Mumbai, which looks at frameworks and what allow for how development controls actually allow for certain kinds of fabric to be produced in the city, but they're so opaque that you need multiple layers to actually unveil what the development controls are actually doing. And yet, when we go back into the city, you see these beautiful projects. This is a project called the Swadeshi Market, which is roughly 3/4 the size of the Manhattan city block, built back in the 1890s, and it operates at an urban level because it allows for streets to extend through the building fabric, and at the same time, and that's the building from the outside. You can see how innocuous looking it is at the face of it. And these are those streets that allow people to move through the building, almost like the city extends through the entire building, not stop at the actual edge. And how above sit these residential housing with courtyards and bridges between. And it's this incredible mixed-use typology that we've forgotten about, that existed before developers started doing that today. But when you start looking at those streets carefully, you start seeing that these streets are actually ventilated through stack effects. There are ventilators that sit in the courtyards above that allow for the streets to be naturally ventilated. And this is just an image of one of those details. And the details don't stop there. So in another project in the Bhatia Chowk, we found these incredible tripartite windows that open, that have 3 panels on the same planar face that work for different times of the day, allowing for cool breeze in the evening at a lower level, and during the day when the upper window is closed. So that also works according to climatic devices. But we've forgotten about all of this primarily because we've looked at development as being not contiguous, and development being something that's new. And I think that's where my talk is actually kind of structured. The fact that we operate within continuities that if we recognize, I think we'll be able to build much more sensitive environments. And this is really the last slide that I have. That in doing this, I'm using a title from an A.K. Ramanujan essay, which if you haven't read, I would strongly recommend you do. It's called An Indian Way of Thinking, where he talks about how subjectivity is perhaps the only Indian thing where even he argues that truth is subjective. If you look at the 300 versions of Ramayana as it exists, and in this subjectivity, there is also this idea of context, and everything within its context needs to operate in its particularly unique way. And if you're able to learn this from history and what's happened before, I think these continuities actually would allow us to be much more sensitive environments in the cities that we live in. Thank you.
Thank you, Sameep. Thank you for sharing all your lovely projects and emphasizing that cooling is a fundamental right for all of us. Before we move on to questions, I actually would like to invite our next speaker to share her perspective. A New York-based architect, she's celebrated for her deeply humanistic approach to design, where architecture becomes an instrument of dignity, well-being, and community empowerment. Her globally acclaimed Rajkumari Ratnavati Girls School in Jaisalmer stands as a pioneering example of passive cooling, eco-sensitive construction, and cultural continuity in one of the world's most extreme desert climates. Grounded in local craft, sandstone, curved forms, and social purpose, her work shows how architecture can provide comfort without energy-heavy systems. She uses design as a tool for equity, improving lives in heat-vulnerable regions. May I please invite Diana Kellogg.
Hello, everyone. I'm so glad to see so many people here. It's very exciting, especially at this incredible conference, which I've greatly enjoyed so far. So, I am going to be speaking about two projects that are extremely different and in very harsh climates, but with very different considerations. So I'm going to speak about the Rajkumari Ratnavati School, which I'm sure you're all familiar with. And I'm going to speak about a project that is still in the conceptual phase, which is a dinosaur museum in the Gobi Desert in Mongolia. So this is a challenging landscape, as is the one in Jaisalmer, and I will walk you through how we are trying to, and actually did manage to conquer the site. So people are always asking me how, as a New York architect, did I find myself here in India? It was this image, which was on an invitation to come to an event to raise money for a girls' school in Rajasthan. I had never seen a building like this before. I was absolutely mesmerized by it. And in 2 weeks, I was on a plane to Jaisalmer because I had to go to India to see what these marvels were all about. When I got to Jaisalmer, I was overwhelmed. This is Gardasar Lake, which is actually an incredible architectural marvel, which speaks to what I call is beauty as an act of survival. I find when you go to places that are extreme and the conditions are difficult, when people manage to build with such beauty, it's actually incredibly profound. And I found out later that this, I thought it was called a lake, but it's actually a catch basin for all of the water in the entire city which, the original planners for Jaisalmer were brilliant. They basically made the entire city a whole waterway to collect water in this catch basin. It's gone now because, like most cultures, we forget what was actually the reasons for the origin of many things. And now the airport actually interrupts that passage of water. Here's the Jaisalmer Fort, which you're most likely aware of, built in 1156, and it's been occupied for about 800 years. And the architecture inside is amazingly rich, and it stands as a tribute to the quality and the resistance of the Jaisalmer stone. When I start a project, I always like to visit the place, and in particular, a place I've never, ever been to. And then I start sketching. I actually intentionally don't do that much research because I want to be able to absorb on site the energies of the site, the energies of the people, the tensions, the aspirations of the people there. So I started sketching sand dunes. I wanted a connection to the natural surroundings. I wanted the building to comfort and heal. And I wanted to capture the essence of wind, shifting sands, movement, the flow of water, and the expression of freedom and education and self-expression. I came upon the oval. There's a lot of reasons for the oval. One is it actually is a consistent symbol throughout a lot of cultures for female strength. And what I wanted to do was to repeat that, which actually would be the symbol of infinity, which would imagine a chain extending as far as one could imagine. And the power of what the outstretched hand does to actually create effects in different parts of the world where there's a ripple effect beyond what you create. That's the ideal. And then to just have some organizing principles, I called the cradle the school, the eye, which was having good with knowledge. It was where there was a community center, a library, the computers, all in one building. So that would have a passive cooling system. And then the woo, which is a creativity, women's cooperative, fertility. And then the axes between these buildings and what kind of energy that created. So I will walk through the school, because I'm sure many of you have seen it, but I'll point out some of the aspects that I think are relevant to this talk. So one thing you could see here is actually, people are always saying, where are the villages? But the villages are actually quite close. The pictures that are usually seen are with the Thar Desert in the background. So that is a nature preserve, so it sits in this amazing position right on the edge of that reserve. This is one of my favorite photos because it shows a grandfather bringing his two twin daughters to school for the first time. And it represents a generational shift in thinking. And I find it very important. The entrance to the school, the foyer where they would be checked in by the headmaster or the teachers before entering the actual courtyard. The actual courtyard, which has done some surprising things that I thought of before the design, but they actually really resonate now because it's this oval and it blocks out the rest of the desert. All you perceive is the sky, and the sky is sort of symbolizes knowledge. How high can you go? How high can you go if you're supported? If you're feeling, if you're in a situation that's safe, that feels healing, and then after that, you're able to be free to explore, to learn, to understand and pursue education. And you see these girls, they feel very safe inside. It's their sort of little kingdom. There were 2 trees that we captured in the building, and created these kind of stepping platforms around, so they could be a natural area for the teachers to go outside and teach. Here's another one. These 2 trees, and actually in the background you see these round shapes. The round shapes actually were for the water coolers, for the water fountains. I had seen when I visited a lot of places in India, these sort of big, large black boxes in the middle of palaces and other places that were on site. They just were congruous with the architecture. So I asked them if I could put the box behind the wall and just have the faucet come out. And it actually works very well. Here's a view from the roof. And, a lot of times when you're designing a building, there are these kind of happy accidents that you don't actually anticipate. And this was one of them. This is one of my favorites, which is we used recycled tiles for the roof, and which is a fairly common thing to use in Jaisalmer. There's a place that they cycle them, and then they pound them into these really beautiful mosaics, but it's really very utilitarian. But in this case, the light through the dollies created this kind of magical occurrence, and it almost feels like water. So that's one of my favorite things. And actually, when it was published, so many people in the U.S. kept saying to me, how can I source these tiles? And I said, you can't. They're recycled tiles, and they're not sold. They are actually part of the ethos of the way the city lives. Here is one thing that I created, which was a clay wall, a place for the girls to run up and down in privacy behind this privacy screen. And then on the left is stairs going up, and you can see I used the solar panels as a canopy. I feel strongly that if you're using solar panels, they should actually be used as building materials whenever you can. And this was actually an interesting conversation, because a woman who had asked to volunteer said, Madam, they will never play inside this wall. And I said, why? And they said, it's just not culturally accepted. And I said, well, then I'll give them a privacy screen. And so that was how that evolved. This is the building at night, and it's actually meant to be used at night for performances. The acoustics of the Oval actually are great, and the steps around are good for seating. So as I've been involved in the project, many of the climate conditions that are the harsh, difficult ones have exacerbated monsoons, gusts of winds, dust storms. And actually, I've experienced when I'm there personally a change in 30 to 50 degrees, Fahrenheit, but which is extraordinary. And if you look at this graph, you can see before 2000, it was relatively within the temperature differentials relatively in the same zone. You can see what happens as you move forward. The temperatures are rising in extreme and very quick incrementals. This is an analysis, a sustainable analysis of the building. The carbon footprint is 73 lesser than any of the school of this kind. The simulation, we have very high lux levels of the natural daylight, so they never turn the lights on. The building orientation and the elliptical shape allow for continuous wind circulation, and we produce 15K solar power for the school, which basically is all the power they need. There's rainwater harvesting system, which is basically the entire courtyard, and it produces enough water for the school. Many things I used, many architectural details I used from the Jaisalmer architecture, because my feeling was if they had lived for centuries in this environment, they had created some tools to deal with the heat. And one of the very simple ones was, if you see all the way to the left, the sunshade, which keeps the rain out as well, but also blocks the glare. So there's cross ventilation and diffused light because the clear story windows are high. The elliptical form allows maximum wind flow. The lattice helps in cooling the building down through the Venturi effect. The solar, I've spoken about. The high thermal mass of the Jaisalmer stone actually in and of itself is one of the biggest elements to keep this building heat resistant. And when I had arrived, I had spoken to the contractors and the general contractors about what could we make this building out of. Naturally, I thought concrete. It would be, it's a low budget, and the client is the girls, and the ultimate goal was to actually make a place for them. I wasn't focusing so much on sustainability. I was focusing on comfort and keeping the building cool for them, but not air conditioned. Air conditioning would have been inappropriate. First of all, we don't have windows in this school because there's too much shifting of sand and moving blurs when windows are problematic. So actually, an early interview that I did, somebody asked me if there was air conditioning, and I simply said no. But the headline from that moment forward was, Diana Kellogg produces school in the desert that needs no AC. And that's actually not what I said. I actually I knew the dangers of actually overcooling the building, because these girls lived in neighboring villages where there wasn't air conditioning. So I wanted to make it more comfortable for them. And that's actually, I think, an important part of when we talk about cooling and heating. It's relative to the place that you are, and it's relative to the place that, or there many factors. So pulling in air conditioning isn't necessarily the right thing. This is various diagrams that show how this ellipse worked. One of the main things is the classrooms were all oriented towards the south. So you can see by the shadow in the courtyard that all the classrooms were actually shaded. So we were using shade as a way to be heat resilient here. More diagrams. This is what happens at night. The night air enters and the stored heat escapes, which cools the building. Here's a classroom, and one of the main things is the composition of the masonry walls, which, again, I went to the source, the builders, to see what their building section was. Because I was not going to bring in a building section that may not have worked, and obviously their building sections had done an amazing job at keeping the buildings cool. So it's actually got a layer of Jaisalmer stone and then contact stone, and then on the interior is light plaster, which is actually a very strong cooling element. You could actually touch the plaster and it feels cool. Another thing that was really important to me, which is pulling in getting the local people involved. And there are many ways to do that. Obviously, our crew was all local. There was also a neighboring town which had a number of men that actually went to Mumbai to make furniture, and I said, why can't we get them to make furniture for us? It makes a practical sense. It involves that community, and also children's furniture needs to be repaired quite frequently. Another thing that I'm just giving two examples of the ways that I worked with the craftsmen. I did not want to get the lights from Delhi, which is one of the things they were insisting upon. But instead I told the electrician to make the light fixtures. He said, no, I can't do that. And instead I just told him to wire a socket to a place, and the masons would make the enclosure. So this is the entire complex. The two buildings have not been built. And you can see the shading devices that I had. Some were made of fabric, which is a thing that they do in valleys. The old valleys actually cut across at night, and then shading near the courtyards, near the Mazakuzi. So this was for the second phase, and this is one of the things that I love to talk about in terms of coming from the West with my education and learning from India. Basically, I had a very prominent engineering firm in the U.S. take this structure and put a grid up top. When I showed it to the contractor, he said, there's no way, Diana, this is going to collapse the building. I found an amazing Indian engineer who actually said, we're going to use your shape to actually create the structure for the building. So he drew this beautiful design in which we were going to put the clay pots inside, which is actually something that's done in Jaisalmer to keep the building. It's an age-old building technique. Also, for the second two buildings, we were going to use an air-earth cooling system because, as I said, one was for the computer systems and library, and all of those needed some kind of passive. So here's the building that was intended to be, maybe will be at some point, but then three different structures. This is actually a video, which I'm not going to show because I don't think I have time. Oh, I guess I am. Enjoy the music. So, Mongolia. I was asked to do a dinosaur museum in the Gobi Desert. Like I said, when I go someplace, I actually go and study kind of what artifacts I can see. One thing that kept coming up there was the circle, and the circle is an important element in the way they live and also in their spirituality. So, original sketches, looking for different ideas, sort of grasp onto the project. And then this is part of a submission we did for a competition that we won for conceptual design, innovative architecture of the year, or something along those lines. But we were discovering the forms and actually trying to work from the shape of a sand dune, because this area had been sand dunes prior to the today desert, which is actually more of a harder packed granular sand. More of the same. So we developed kind of a way of approaching these projects in different countries, because I keep getting asked to do things in places I've never been upfitted before. So what we do is we start with a site analysis, and we do it very thoroughly with our own information, and we do sun study, a wind study. It's much more extensive than this. And then another aspect of what we do in order to make sure that we are kind of starting from a place of sustainability is to find the materials that are dealing within a 5-kilometer area. So this is what we found. And then this is actually something that I started after this work, because I get asked to do projects and go the world. We have someone from Zimbabwe who's waiting patiently for orphanage or school. And the idea was to support many of the things that I had learned about during the incredible experience I had in India. So, we wanted to support the local crafts and their ability to use multiple materials in a very surprising way. We have a line of lights or furniture. Also, the craftsmen are completely overwhelming to me. I mean, to have the privilege of working in hand-cast stone is amazing. Actually, in general, for an architect anywhere in the world to be able to work with hand-carved stone. So all of you should take advantage of it, because it's amazing opportunity. And this was part of one of the things we did in Jumpsuits Made in India. And then we had an event for Pride. That's my daughter in the middle, who's helping me with the project. Tara for Change, actually, only 2 people on my board about my kids. They're adult kids. And that's it.